I think we can all agree that UK politics is not exactly where we want it to be. And there's so many things that we all believe we could do better. Now, although I agree with some of the things that Conservatives say, I disagree with a lot of them. And I agree with some of the things Labour say, I disagree with a lot of them. So I find it very difficult to vote for a party that I believe or would have any meaningful change in the country. My objective through these lives is to share the knowledge I have learned with people in a shorter format, just taking off the key things I've learned from the week on my journey of figuring out how I can fix and make a better change in the world. This week we're going to talk about UK politics, and we're going to go through some of the positive and negative aspects of the UK's political landscape. Some of the things that have happened in the past and some of the things that are going to happen in the future. We're also going to touch on our population decline. And this is something that I believe is a very serious issue that is happening not just in our country, but around the world. And it's leading towards some of the issues that we're seeing today. And then just going to summarize at the end of the live some of the financial things that I believe the country should be doing to make the country better for everybody. And that is what we should always be looking for, is making the country and making it better, not just for ourselves, but for everybody. And sometimes that requires sacrifice. And I'm going to discuss some of the sacrifices that I believe we should make in order to make things that we have as good as they possibly can be. So let's get started. Libertarianism by Ludwig von Mises. Libertarianism is a classic work on the philosophy of individual freedom and limited government. Published in 1927, the book argues that individual liberty is the cornerstone of a prosperous and peaceful society, and that the only legitimate role of government is to protect the rights of individuals from aggression and coercion. Mises begins the book by defining the concept of liberty and distinguishing it from various forms of coercion, such as slavery, feudalism, and totalitarianism. He argues that freedom is the natural state of mankind, and that it is only using violence and aggression that individuals are coerced into surrendering their freedom. Mises then goes on to explore the various arguments for and against government intervention in the economy, including socialism, interventionism, and laissez-faire capitalism. He argues that socialism and interventionism lead to economic inefficiencies, shortages, and ultimately the destruction of individual freedom. On the other hand, laissez-faire capitalism, which is based on the principles of free market and private property, is the only system that can ensure the efficient use of resources and the satisfaction of consumers' wants and needs. Throughout the book, Mises stresses on the importance of individual freedom and limited government, arguing that the pursuit of economic and personal liberty is not only morally just, but also leads to greater prosperity, peace, and happiness. He also argues that government intervention in the economy leads to a distortion of prices and misallocation of resources, which ultimately harms consumers and producers alike. Overall, libertarianism is an important contribution to the philosophical and economic debate over the proper role of government in society. It presents a compelling case for the benefits of individual freedom and the dangers of government intervention, and remains a seminal work in the libertarian tradition. Now, this book is an old book. There's a couple of instances there where they use language that wouldn't be appropriate to today's woke audience. So I never put it in there. But if you can look past some of the language that was written in 1927 English or 1927 German, you understand that it's not aimed at anybody and it should just be ignored. Now, it took 7 hours to read this book. It was a really good read, and I thoroughly enjoy the subject of libertarianism. It is one of those political philosophies that I find aligns best with my beliefs, goals, and values. I think the reason why I'm drawn to libertarianism so much is it places a high value on freedom and autonomy, and being a person who loves to be in charge of his own life. Being a person who feels like every day I make steps towards making my life better. I don't rely on government. I don't rely on other people to blame for my problems in my life. I take responsibility for everything of my own. And I continuously try to push forward to make my life better. And I feel the libertarian outlook is so aligned with my personal values that I'm drawn to it. The emphasis on personal freedom is really appealing to me, for somebody who values individual autonomy and is a self-determinated person. Secondly, libertarians believe in a limited role of government. They believe in having as small a government as possible, and they believe the true role of government is to protect individuals from harm such as theft, fraud, and aggression. This means that a libertarian system generally has really small government and low taxes, as they believe that excessive intervention from government can stifle economic growth, reduce personal freedom, and lead to corruption and an abuse of power. The next thing that I really like about libertarianism is it really advocates for the free market system. They believe that voluntary exchange and competition leads to the most efficient use of resources and the best outcomes for consumers. And this emphasis on economic freedom is really appealing to people who believe in entrepreneurship and innovation. Of course, there is criticism and challenges to the libertarian outlook, and I'll define the positives and negatives a bit later on. However, what I believe is there's no one-size-fits-all government or political philosophy. I think what we have to do is we have to work together to make a political ideology that aligns with everything we believe. And I believe in the UK right now, the time for change has come. The politics of the United Kingdom is characterized by its parliamentary system of government, which is based on the principles of supremacy of the House of Commons and the lower house of the UK's Parliament. The UK is a constitutional monarchy, with its king serving as the head of state, although this role is largely ceremonial. The UK has a multi-party system, with two main parties being the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. The Conservative Party generally advocates for conservative and liberal policies, including free market economics, low taxes, and a smaller role for government in people's lives, while the Labour Party generally advocates for progressive policies including social welfare, higher taxes on the wealthy, and a greater government involvement in people's lives. The UK is also composed of several devolved nations, including Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, each with their own separate political systems and assemblies. In recent years, the issue of Scottish independence has become a major political issue, with the Scottish National Party advocating for Scotland to become an independent country. Brexit. The UK's decision to leave the European Union has had a significant impact on UK politics in recent years. The decision to leave the EU was highly controversial and deep, with proponents arguing it would allow UK to take back control of its laws and borders, while opponents argue that it would harm the UK economy and international standing. Overall, UK politics is characterized by a highly competitive, often divisive, and increasingly polarized political landscape, with major issues such as Brexit and Scottish independence continuing to shape political discourse and debate. The UK is a multi-party system, basically mostly headed by two parties, the Conservatives on the one side and Labour on the other side. Now, for me, I am neither a Conservative or a Labour supporter. I find myself running down the middle of the two parties. There's certain things that the Conservatives talk about that I agree with, and there's certain things that the Labour Party talk about that I agree with. And I feel like a person like myself who wants to sit down the middle and make the right decisions for the country, even if it might make my life a little bit harder, I don't believe there's a political party out there that represents me. I don't believe there's a political party out there that represents 90% of the British population. And this is the sad, troubling thing. The problem with the political parties now, the Conservatives have so much history and Labour Party has so much history that it's very difficult for people to overlook that and trust them. And the problem is all the other little parties that surround them are even further at the left and right. We have no political party that uses data and works down the middle. I mean, the UK is composed of several devolved nations. We have the Northern Irish, we have the Scottish, we have the Wales, and we have England. And in recent years, the Scottish have been pushing for independence, which has become a major political issue for the country, especially at a time now where the country is more looking inwards to solve its problems. Now is not the time for our nations to infight. Now is the time for our nations to pull together and solve the problems, to create to put United Kingdom back where it needs to be, at the top of the food chain. We have other political issues that have divided the population, namely Brexit. We know today that it hasn't been handled well. The problem is the political parties again aren't acting the will of the democracy. People democratically voted for Brexit, and it hasn't been delivered properly. We've had a washed down, watered down version of Brexit that is not what the UK public want. And there are a lot of issues for and against continuing with Brexit. The problem is, over time, and the infighting now has taken away a lot of the benefits because people haven't seen the benefits, because we haven't actually achieved it properly. And we may never achieve it properly. But what we cannot do is we cannot go backwards and go against the will of the people. The problem with the two-party system is we have a lot of people on two sides that don't agree with and agree with. And we're never going to get anywhere unless we learn to work together. And this is my biggest problem with the parliamentary system of government. The parliamentary system of government, it's the same in the UK as it is in America, where the two main parties will not work together on issues that solve the country's problems. What they prefer to do is watch the other party fail and then tell the other party how they would have done better or how the other party had done a problem, because they avoid, block, and do everything they can to stop things from going smoothly. And that's the name of the game. Ultimately, it's a political game. 4 years, they work in cycles to try and get in and out of power. So no changes really is made because it is very difficult to do something in 4 years. Or it is very difficult to do something if your opposition party doesn't want you to succeed. And this is the major problem with UK politics, or politics in the world, is once a government is elected, they need the backing of the opposition. And we don't get that because people have got their own narratives, their own objectives, and they're not the best interests of the UK people. Overall, UK politics is characterized as a highly competitive, often divisive, and increasingly polarized political system, an increasingly polarized political landscape, with major issues like Brexit, Scottish independence continuing to shape UK politics. Now, don't get me wrong, there are loads of positive aspects of UK politics. UK is a democratic country. We have a really robust political system based on our parliamentary democracy. This allows people like myself to vote for a representative who we believe best suits our beliefs, values, and objectives. However, there is a negative side to this system in which the fact is you can't vote for an independent person who has your ideology. You need to vote for a party who has your ideology. So rather than voting for specific people who we believe have our ideology, we end up having to vote for political parties who only share a percentage of our ideology. The UK has a strong rule of law. Regardless of our social status, we all have to conform to the law. This ensures the country remains stable, which is essential for businesses and investors. The other really positive aspect of UK politics is we have been a democracy for generations now. We have a very peaceful transfer of power and a relatively low level of corruption, although we have seen in recent years there is still corruption. And ultimately, where there is power and there's money, there is always going to be a certain element of corruption. It is very hard to root out all corruption. However, the levels we see in this country are nowhere near the levels of corruption that are happening in other places of the world. And again, the stability of our political system is really attractive to investors, as it ensures governments can stay focused on long-term goals. The UK has a comprehensive welfare system. Whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, the welfare system of the UK is probably one of the best welfare systems in the world. And it's really there to defend the vulnerable people, the low-income families, the disabled, and the elderly. The idea of having that safety net ensures that everybody in the country gets to live with dignity. And that is something we should be truly proud of. And that is something we should continuously try to ensure we protect. Because that is humanity. That is what's important. It can't be unlimited amount. It has to be controlled within the receipts of the country. The UK has always been a major player in the world, in the geopolitical politics of the world. We're a little island nation. We have a small population of 68 million, yet we're one of the biggest players on the world political scene. And that is where we need to stay. And by initiating Brexit, it'll allow us to make more headway into the rest of the world rather than Europe. Europe are always going to trade with the UK. We are always going to trade with Europe. We're neighbours. It's convenient. It's easy. However, there is much better places to trade with than Europe. They have the same climate as us. They have the same resources as us. We need to make partnerships further afield to get the resources we need to build a bigger, stronger economy. And lastly, one of the main positives of living in the UK is what I'm doing right now. And that is our ability to have freedom of speech, to speak out against government, to speak out against the things we don't believe in, and to do what we believe is right. The idea of being able to speak your mind without the fear of prosecution and ensuring that there's always an opportunity for open and robust debate on issues that are affecting the country is one of the cornerstones of what makes Great Britain great. And I can talk about countries right now that we see every day on the news that don't have that liberty. You know, China, Russia are the big ones. Freedom of speech is important and we should fight to hold that. And we have to remember that government should not be passing any laws that stifle freedom of speech, even if we agree with the government's reason why. And I'll tell you why. Because one day you might not have a government that you believe in power, and you don't want them to stop your ability to question them in a public forum. As UK politics is, we also have a number of negative aspects of UK politics. Now, right now, polarization is probably one of the biggest issues we're facing in the UK. You know, we have deep divisions between the major parties and their supporters. And this leads to a lack of consensus when we're making difficult to pass meaningful legislation. And this is one of the biggest problems we're experiencing right now in the country. Look at Brexit. This is a prime example of two sides of the fence not working together to find solutions that best suit the country. Because a lot of what people are talking about is not true. A lot of the issues people are focused on can be proven and are not true. It doesn't even take a degree in economics to figure these problems out. Any idiot like myself can go online and read a whole bunch of government published papers and then go into the European Union countries and read their government published papers to see that the opportunities are there. Polarization has caused a massive rift between the people of the country and reduced our belief in our government, because we are not seeing government act out the will of the people. And this is a huge, huge, huge problem. Because if people see that government aren't following what they believe or what they voted for, then that's a massive letdown in the country. And that will lead to the demise of the political system. So regardless of whether you were a Brexiter or a Remainer, it doesn't matter. The vote was passed. It is the job of government, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, to go and get the best possible deal you can for the country. No questions asked, no personal agenda. That is the objective, because that is our political system. If a vote is passed, and this is democracy, we don't always agree with democracy. And this is the problem with democracy. There is a negative to democracy, is if the majority wants something that you know is not right or you believe is not right, you can't go against the population. It has to be enacted. Otherwise, your whole political structure will collapse. So, what has happened, despite a stable political system, we have one of the lowest voter turnouts in the world. And I believe that this is because the two main political parties are too far away from the centre line. And the centre line is where most people are. A majority of the population just want to do what's best for the country and have an as easy and enjoyable life as possible. Most people accept that there's always going to be hardship. Most people accept that that's a natural fact of life. We can't always be wrapped in bubble wrap, and we can't always feel like everything is just going to be right. But there always has to be a plan, and there always has to be a vision that we have to work towards. Every business has it, every country should have it, every person should have it. You have your personal vision for your life, your company you work for has the corporate vision for the business, and the country should have the country's vision for the country in the future. And at the moment, I don't actually know what the vision is for our country. So we've had loads of corruption recently. COVID-19 was a particular instance where government had been caught out, funding their mates and giving, government contracts to people who probably shouldn't have got them. Now, this is again a perfect example of why government should not be involved in any business. Government is not there to make jobs. Government is not there to protect industry. Government is there to act out the will of people and to keep people safe. People are responsible to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. And industry and businesses are responsible to their investors to keep the business profitable. And that is how the system works. There's three interconnecting systems there, and government only touches the small bits. And essentially interventionism causes more problems with corruption than we're allowed to believe. Again, the biggest problem in the UK is we have a massive amount of centralised power. Most decisions are made in Westminster, and sometimes those decisions do not really reflect the need of the rest of the country. We've seen in recent years the levelling up and moving government businesses into other parts of the country to improve those economies. And a more decentralized way of managing government would improve that exponentially and improve most areas of the country. Smaller government is a much more efficient government. And I think that is the most important thing I've taken away from this week's book, is we need to make government much more streamlined and smaller and really focused on the issues on the issues that government should be involved in. Issues of recent years, we've had a lot of austerity where the government have stopped spending money in areas where they had been before. And this has led to a massive, decline, loads of jobs lost. But ultimately, government shouldn't be spending unnecessary money in any industry. And the government should be a really lean, really efficient system. And I still believe there is areas to improve. And there's areas where we can reduce government spending massively. And yes, people are going to lose their jobs, and yes, people are going to be affected. But the country is going to become stronger from it. And new jobs will appear. That is how industry and privatization and capitalism works. If there is a need and a demand, it'll always be met because there's an opportunity to make a profit. And again, I've already discussed Brexit, but Brexit needs to get done and it needs to get finished. And the country needs to accept what happened and move on. And there's a lot of positive things that can come from Brexit. There's a lot of new synergies that the country can make away from Europe that can put Great Britain back on the map. Bigger alliances with Canada, with Australia and New Zealand for a start. If we could put together a treaty between, those four countries, us and those three other countries, that could be one of the strongest military alliances, one of the strongest economic alliances, and one of the largest contributors to natural resources that the country needs. Europe has no natural resources. The next country that has natural resources is Ukraine. And Great Britain is already there, building a relationship, helping the Ukrainians defend themselves and hopefully one day get their freedom back. Because the opportunities for our country in Ukraine are huge. The natural resources in Ukraine are massive. they're undercapitalized and they haven't been used because the Russians haven't been interested in them. They've been developing theirs on their side. There is an opportunity here for Great Britain. Brexit is not as negative as everybody makes out to be. We're always going to trade with our partners in Europe. The UK is the second biggest economy in Europe. And unfortunately, with the demise of Germany, which is coming, due to the fact they can't get enough power and enough energy to run their market, they're a landlocked country and they've got no access to these resources. Great Britain could end up being the largest economy in the next 5 to 10 years if we play our cards right. But we need to work together in order to achieve that. Now, looking at the UK politics through the eyes of a libertarian, there's a lot of positives and there's a lot of negative to the libertarian outlook. A libertarian style government in the UK would flourish. And as long as we as a country could balance our individual freedom and our social responsibility, the potential benefits could be off the chart. Economic growth. We could see an increase in innovation and entrepreneurship, which would stimulate economic growth. The libertarian style government would enforce people to take responsibility for their own lives and stop looking to other people to solve their problems. This would create a country of motivated individuals who are in charge of their own destinies. So the libertarian outlook would ensure that people take personal responsibility for their lives. It would allow people to believe in themselves and make the right choices for themselves. And the right choices for them is not always the right choices for everybody else. And that autonomy allows people to enjoy and make the life they want. By reducing government bureaucracy and interventionism in business, will create a more competitive market where smaller players can enter the marketplace. At the moment, legislation and government control stops small producers from entering the marketplace. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. And this is something that's quite a big thing and quite dear to me, is food. Now, let's say you're a small farmer. Let's say you have 5 acres of land and you can produce, let's say, 300 chickens a month. Now, in America, you could cull those chickens yourselves, provided you meet all the criteria, and you could sell those chickens directly to your customers, cutting out the middleman. In the UK, you can't. You have to take those chickens to an abattoir, and they have to kill those chickens. And it's a bit of a grim subject, but ultimately that's the food chain. So they kill those chickens and they charge the farmer X amount per chicken. They then usually buy the meat at a wholesale value. So the poor farmer is not making nearly as much as he could be making if he was selling the chicken directly to me. And this is this is where government intervention causes these problems. It creates big industries, big abattoirs, big farms, but it takes out little operators where they were producing much better quality product, much more nutritious chicken, at a fraction of the price you'd be paying in the supermarket, but twice the quality. Or even the same price you're paying in the supermarket, yet twice the quality. And this is where we're letting ourselves down. Government intervention in these types of industries is stopping the country from flourishing. So there is massive potential that if the country adopted a libertarian style government, it could be something that we haven't seen since post-World War II. However, there are several drawbacks to libertarianism, and I don't deny that a capitalistic system, we see it now, does create inequalities. Successful businessmen do become ultra rich. But what we always forget is, the Jeff Bezoses and the Bill Gates and the Elon Musks, for instance. Those guys are worth a huge amount of money. But if you look at how many people they employ, so Elon Musk and his 3 businesses, I think SpaceX and Tesla, he employs nearly 200,000 engineers. That is a huge amount of positive capital in the economy that these rich, ultra-rich people bring. I have no idea what the global employee size of Microsoft is or Amazon. And regardless of what we think, those are a huge amount of jobs that are created by a capitalistic laissez-faire system. But imagine we removed the bureaucracy and allowed smaller players to enter at the bottom level and compete. Because no matter how good a big business you are, you can't compete with personal service. You can't compete with an owner-run business dealing with their customers and treating them with the respect that any small business owner understands. People love to be respected. People love good service. And by government interfering in business stops that. There is an inequality. It does become super wealthy people. However, those super wealthy people do create a lot of wealth for other people. Again, libertarians are against social welfare. I am not against social welfare. So for me, there has to be an area there that has to be adapted to suit the beliefs and the needs of the great British public. We expect and want free healthcare, the best we can afford as a country. We want and expect education for our children, the best the country can afford. We want and expect to be looked after when we're old, with the best in the best way that the country can afford. And when times are hard, or we're not earning enough, or life's kicked us, we expect to be looked after to the point where we don't die, we don't starve. And there's certain things that the country could do better. And I believe it would do better if the government adopted the libertarian outlook. You know, in our current political model, our population needs to keep growing to keep our economy growing. You know, we need to increase taxes every year because we have debt. And we have all these social systems that cost money to run. But what if we linked all these systems to a fixed percentage of our receipts? You know, our population is not growing at the moment. We are actually in a small decline. At the moment, we can soak it up with immigration. But we need a greater pool of contributors. We need more industry, more business, and we need to create more industry. Industry is important, but in order to create industry, you need workers and you need resources. And we need to get natural resources. Natural resources are predominantly found along the equator. Asia, Africa, South America. We need to build relationships with these countries to get resources, so we can add value as a country. That's what we do best. We add value. We have the brain power and the technology to make top quality products, or even the machinery that makes top quality products. So I briefly touched on there population and the requirement for population to continuously grow to meet the country's demands. I'm going to run through a few slides now and discuss where we are on the world stage. I'm going to discuss a few other countries that are in a worse position than us and a few other countries that are in a better position than us. And I'm going to discuss the things we need to do as a country to solve and protect ourselves from these changes, these demographic changes. And a lot of them, some people on the one side are not going to like, and some people on the other side are not going to like. But this is where politics should be. Sometimes the honest truths should be told by our political leaders, and I don't believe they do. They sit there and they tell us about, we need to cut costs, we don't have the money to do this, but they don't tell us why, and they don't tell us what's happening. And I think as a British people, we should know this stuff. And this stuff you can fact check on the internet. It's all on the internet. I don't have access to any special stuff that nobody else has. I wish I did. I think I'd make a lot better presentation if I had more data. But this is where I believe the world is going, and then this is where I believe the UK can rise up from it. Population structures are made. So the first one is there. You got the first one, which is rapid growth. It's got a really small, really big bottom area, children coming up through the ranks, and a really small older population that the middle section is carrying. This is the ideal growth for rapid growth. And you'll see this in countries like India, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, countries that have huge birth rates. Now, if you move over to the second one, this is a slow growth formula where it's starting to look very tapered. The bottom is not as big as the top, it's not as small as the top. However, there's still a good chunk in the middle to carry the top and the bottom. Now you move into zero growth. Now, zero growth is where the top section of the triangle is starting to get bigger than the bottom section. It's not quite as big there yet, but this is the root. This is where the problems begin. And when the pyramid gets to this shape, it can take up to a full lifetime to solve these problems. These problems are not solved overnight. And this is what people have to remember. When it gets over to the next one, which is negative growth, where the top is really big and the bottom is really small, this is catastrophe. This is a serious problem, and it is very difficult to come back from this, and it's going to probably end up in collapse. And this is where a lot of the countries of the world are headed right now. And this is what we have to discuss. This is one of the scariest things about modern day age. Right, so here's the world demographics. So here's the UK and the United States. I put us two here because we're very similar. We're currently in a slow growth shape. We have a strong middle section, which is carrying our older section and our younger section. However, what we have to remember is the middle section is going to move up. And if you look there, our biggest chunk now at 59, and this is obviously a 5-year-old slide. So in 20 years' time, that big section is going to be up at the top. And then if you look at the bottom, that's a very small section. So we're now coming into negative growth. The same is happening in the USA, although nowhere near as fast as the UK. What we have to remember is the USA, they have the added benefit of Mexico. Now, Mexico has a really positive triangle, so they have a lot of workers. So the USA can import as many workers as they need to keep their factories running. The UK, we have a very small pool of workers. Very small pool of workers. And we need workers to keep the economy going. We need to produce stuff. If you're not producing stuff, you're not making money. You're not making money, you can't support people. And this is something we have to look at now. Now, a little bit more scary. China and Russia. So if you look at China and Russia now, you can see they're in negative growth. If you look at Russia, they have a very, very big population coming up into retirement age and a very, very small population at the bottom. Now, the analysts are saying that Russia have their last generation of men now. This is the last time Russia could fight a mass war, because once all these men go, there's nobody coming up. They have the smallest birth rate in the world. They have one of the smallest birth rates in the world. And China has the same problem. China have made some massive, massive errors, and they are getting to the point now where they have a huge, huge amount of people retiring and not producing, and a very small amount of people to keep the factories running. Add that into the political issues around the world, and China, although it's a superpower, is going to run out of resources and people. And this is going to create massive amounts of uncertainty. These two countries are going to cause massive amounts of uncertainty in the world in the next 20 years. The old way of thinking that the world was going to just go back to normal, it's not. The times are changing now, and there's an opportunity here for countries like Great Britain to capitalize and put ourselves back on the world market. Now, these are your high growth areas. So you've got India, who's coming up to 1.4 billion people. India, in the next couple of years, will outstrip China as the biggest population in the world. So India has obviously the biggest and fastest growing economy in the world. They have the most amount of workers. They have pretty decent access to raw materials. They have pretty good networks around there. They're in a much better situation than China. And then you've got Africa. Now Africa, predominantly, most countries in Africa are looking like this, like Nigeria. They have really rapid growth. These are the rapid growth areas of the world. These are the countries that have natural resources and the manpower to make huge amounts of growth. And these are going to become huge players in the next 20 to 30 years. People need to be aware of this. We need to be aware that these countries are going to be the new players. They're going to have the population, but they don't have the education. And that is where we can capitalize. We have the education that they do not. We can create the infrastructure and the facilities and the equipment and the expertise that they need. And that is where we'll make our money. The most important thing is babies. Now, Individually, they may seem pretty basic, quite cute, kind of cute, a little bit annoying, a little bit stressful. However, we're running out of babies. The world, the Western world and the developed world are running out of babies. And babies are really important. Once you get to a certain level of population decline, it is very hard or almost impossible to come back from that. And when you think about a baby, or when you think about a person, it takes 20 years to create a consumer. 20 years to create a new consumer. It takes 40 years to create a new investor. And it costs around £100,000 to create a contributing member to society. These are large sums, and these are long game events that we are just not following at the moment. And the UK is in this boat. We are seeing a population decline, a small marginal decline, but it's going to get bigger if we don't change certain things. And why? We have government, we have two governments fighting over things right now. Why are they not talking about this stuff? Why is it people like myself who are saying this, looks like conspiracy nuts, saying this type of stuff? Why are we not talking about this? Because governments and political parties don't care about anything until the next term. So this is a term for 5 governments' time, 6 governments' time, 7 governments' time. This is going to become a major issue. Right now, it's not an issue. Right now, we're more worried about, the ex-prime minister having a barbecue over COVID or whatever. We're not worried about real issues. The collapse of China, the collapse of Russia, NATO going to war with Russia because Russia are fighting for their existential existence. The China are going to keep Russia going because if Russia fails and Russia collapses, so does China. China gets most of their resources from Russia. There is no political solution to this right now. The Ukrainians are not going to give up their existential existence. And NATO doesn't want to go to war with Russia, a failing country who's going to resort to nuclear weapons. This is where it gets really, really dark, really, really quick. And it all comes down to babies. So these are the UK fertility rates. So from 1950 to 1923, the UK fertility rate has dropped. At its heyday of 1965, around there, it was almost up by 2.7. Now we're down to 1.755 babies per fertile female. And in this situation, it's not me being, misogynistic. Women are our only means of increasing the population. Women are key. They're the most important thing. This has been women's role since the beginning. And there's been a lot of changes to the way we run our lives over the last 4 decades. A lot of women are working longer. They're prioritizing their careers. They're prioritizing their own needs over the existence of humanity. And this is where the social issues have changed the way we see the world. And they are causing a problem. They're causing a problem that is going to be difficult to resolve. Just to give you a little insight, now the UK is in massive population decline. By 2030, we're going to start seeing the first real shortages of people leaving and entering the market. Now, this data is there. This is not made up data. These children are already born. From 2040 onward, those children are factored in on the current birth rate. And that's regarding the birth rate to stay the same. Now, there's loads of social issues and social things that are going to cause the birth rate to potentially drop further. Namely, the next generations that are coming up now are the smallest generations in history. And that can cause a massive problem. And that's going to cause a massive problem. If you look at about 2040, 2035, there's almost 1 million shortage. 1 million people leaving the workplace and not 1 million people coming in. A shortfall of 1 million. 2040, there's a shortfall of 2.6 million. This is the really big one. 2045, shortfall of 100,000. 2050, a shortfall of 300,000. 2055, another 1 million shortfall. 2060, 1.4 million shortfall. 2065, 0.6 million. And I stop there because the data becomes very difficult to work. If we do not have a huge population of people working, we cannot keep our welfare system running. We need to have a certain amount of people working to keep the elderly in their pensions. That is the way the system is designed. Your national insurance goes towards paying the elderly their wage. And yes, those elderly paid their wage to the elderly before, but they were in a much different position because there were more of them. We're in very small pockets of people now in comparison. And that's going to cause a financial issue. We're going to have to increase the age where people can go on pension. There's going to be less money for the welfare state to consume. They're going to increase taxes. It's going to be very uncomfortable. And you could say, well, why don't we tax businesses or tax the rich? Or that doesn't solve the problem. You need a massive amount of people to solve this problem. You need a massive amount of people working and paying taxes. And yes, you could argue that automation and AI is going to reduce some of those jobs. But we ultimately will always have industry where people work. Because that's just how the world works. People have to work. People need a purpose. People will find a reason to do what they do, find a way to make money. It'll change, opportunities change, infrastructure changes, the world changes. But fundamentally, things don't change. People need to earn money to eat. People need to earn money to pay for their houses. People need to earn money to put their children through school or raise their children. People need to save money to retire when they can't work anymore. And this population decline is a serious problem that nobody's talking about. So this is government spending and government receipts, right? You can see by the chart number 1, that's our public sector spending. We spend 302 billion on social protection, 230 billion on health, 124 billion on education, 60 billion on defense, 70 billion on industry, agricultural subsidies, subsidization and employment. We have housing and environment. We have, other EU payments, which are still being paid to this day because we're not finished out of it yet, which is a considerable sum, I'll add. And the country's debt. Now, that debt payment is literally just interest. The UK government owes 2 trillion. That is 100% of our GDP. That is a problem that we transfer onto future generations, and our future generations getting smaller. That is something we have to think about. At the moment, it costs £8 per person in the UK to pay that interest on debt every year. If you look over on the other side, and this is why it's so important to have a huge amount of working people consuming, because that's where we make our money. Income tax, 200 billion. National insurance, 150 billion. VAT, 150 billion. So the money the government makes on us consuming is just as much money as they make from our national insurance contributions. Council tax, 40 billion. Other taxes, 84 billion. These are all people-related taxes. Then you can look at businesses, right? Okay, businesses. They don't pay much tax, 40 billion. Excise and duties or customs, 48 billion. It doesn't seem like it's a lot of money that businesses charge, but what you have to remember is those businesses create those jobs. Those jobs allow people to earn money, and the money that people earn from those jobs pays those taxes. And that's how the system's built. The system is built on people working and paying taxes. And the role of government is to facilitate the opportunity for businesses to be created and formed and protected, intellectual property through our legal system, so that they can flourish and create employment. That should be the only government involvement. Now, government involvement in our health system, government's involvement in our education system, it's like putting a person like me who has no experience in running a business in charge of education. I don't know anything about education. That's the same as a politician running an education system. These guys are not trained education people. They're just money people. And that's my point. You don't need government to interfere in education, and you don't need government to interfere in healthcare if you're the money person. Control the money. Forget about the rest. Let that privatize. Just control the money. If you control the money, the businesses will work to that level of money. And that's how it'll work. There'll always be somebody who can work to that level of money. And you can fix it very easily to the money you're earning as a country. Now, we need to think of our children. I think every member of the UK population wants to keep free education, free healthcare, social security and welfare. I don't think anybody would want any of those to disappear. Those are the things that make us fundamentally British. However, we are going to have to make some sacrifices, and we're going to have to make some changes in order to prepare our country for the future changes that are coming. Now, some of the things that I'm going to talk about now might seem more negative than others, but these are issues that aren't going to change. And I'm open to anybody else's opinion on how things could be done better. But I'm only working on the data. These aren't my personal opinions. These are just what the data tells me. Right, so I said earlier on, the government currently budgets 124 billion for education. The government contributes to the government pays schools for every child that is in education. And it works out on average £5,500 per child. Slightly less for younger years, slightly more for older years. But that's more or less how much it comes to. That works out to around 68 billion. Where's the other 55 billion going? And if you look into that, government are spending money on getting children to read, spending money on how to get more kids to attend school. That is not a job for government, and that is an absolute waste of money. Give the money to the education system to educate the children. That's it. It is the right for every child to attend school. If that child and those parents of that child is not pushing their child in school, that is not a reflection on the school or the government or the country. That is a reflection on that child's parents. And that parent should be the one that's in trouble. And we can make the legal system work to our advantage in that area. So the government does not need to be involved. The legal system needs to be involved. So, what did I say earlier on? We've got a massive problem with population. We're not having enough children. Why are we not having enough children? Because men and women have to work too much. All households now have the husband and the wife at work. What do we do with our kids? We have to put them in aftercare. We have to put them in nursery so we can go back to work. That eats up a huge amount of our resources. So we end up having one child. Maybe two if you're a bit successful, maybe two. If you're super successful, maybe three. The only way you can have more than two children if you're not working is to live on benefits. That is the only way. The country's not geared to allow people to have more children. So what we have to do is we have to change the system. We have to change the system so that it allows people to have more children. So, here's my recommendation. Schools should be open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That allows anybody who's working in a mainstream day-to-day 9-to-5 job to get their children to school and home in their work and still attend work, which will put more people into work. Schools don't necessarily have to be educating those children in their time. There's plenty of time for sports, recreation, small, classes on how to manage their budget, education, like good quality education that the country needs these children to be. These are our future. We need to be educating them to the maximum. School holidays. School holidays are great. A 6-week summer holiday, amazing. How do parents look after their children, especially young children? Schools need to have holiday clubs as part of the school system, so children can attend these holiday clubs if parents haven't got care for their children. And additionally, nursery should start a year earlier. Nurseries should start from 3 or even 2, so that we can get our children back into school, so we can get those parents back to work, because we need them to be at work. The country needs people to be working. But at the same time, we need to allow parents to be able to go back to work, so they can have, this is not so bad. We can have a third child, and we can increase our population again, slowly, our own population. Because remember, if we don't increase our population by our own children, we have to import them in, which means we have to import people from around the world, which means our country has to be super attractive to get the best quality people. Otherwise, we're not going to get the best quality people. And we all know what happens when we don't get the best quality people. Now, my point is, if we increased the money that the government pays per child to 8,000, that would still be 100 billion paid directly to schools for every child they have. The schools are then responsible for educating the children, joining an affiliation like an ISO standard to make sure that the education is good. Government doesn't need to be involved. We can turn this into a private sector. The affiliation systems can be the ones that advertise how good the schools are, and then the schools will buy into those systems, and then the schools will be controlled by those governing affiliated systems. Just like businesses controlled by ISO. Now, Sounds like a simple solution. Why are we not doing it? Because government would lose control of an industry. Government would lose control. And schools and teachers would become accountable. Everybody likes the current system where they can just blame government for all the problems. Yeah, government aren't paying us enough, government aren't doing this, government aren't doing that. Government needs to pay according to a percentage of what we earn. I think at the moment education is around 11% of our total receipts for the country. So that is what it stands at. If the country earns more and we have more money, hey, we can increase that. The more money we earn, the better our education could be. We can increase it to 11% of X. If X is bigger, it's more money. And we can pro-rata it per child, work out, we know exactly how many children are in the country. It's very easy to do the accounting if we have the data. That's that problem solved. That gives parents the opportunity to have more children and not stress about the cost. But at the same time, it educates our population to be to where they need to be. Now, the country wastes a lot of money on this. Because the National Health Service is government run, it's essentially a socialist service. And we all know from socialist services, the bureaucracy is terrible. And the country cannot function like this. There's so much waste. I've done it in my previous videos on the NHS. You can see where the waste is going. And that's only scratching the surface. I've only just started researching into this stuff. And I found so much already. So there are loads of models that will work better. Now, first of all, I need to talk about America here. Because America have the private healthcare model and the insurance. And it is terrible. Because if you don't have good insurance, you don't have good healthcare. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a government-run insurance scheme. A government-funded insurance scheme. Doctors cannot get money from anywhere else except the government. So it's exactly the same as the NHS. The only difference is we're devolving the government away from the day-to-day running of these hospitals and institutions. And we're turning it to the capitalists to make a profit. Now, again, government have all the data. They can essentially perfectly plan how and where the money has to go. They know exactly how many, accidents and emergency cases we have a year. They know exactly how many ambulance trips have been. They know exactly how many people have cancer. They know all this data, and it's easy to work out the exact cost per person on this issue. Now, I've really only worked on the low-level stuff. So this is my argument, and this is the concept that I'm floating forward. So a national health scheme is an insurance policy that allows every person in the country to get the exact same level of care. Now, there'll be an opportunity for people who are working to have a top-up that, if you have free money, you can pay more and you can have more care if you need it. But the way I believe, if you look after yourself at the low level, you're healthy, you have a good lifestyle, you get good sleep, you prioritize good nutrition, you exercise, you do all the basic things we all know lead to a healthy life. This will be more than enough. If you choose to drink excessively, smoke excessively, not exercise, get overweight, get yourself to a point where you're just physically unwell all the time, this is not going to benefit you. So a certain level of ownership has to be placed onto people. Again, the libertarian outlook. Now imagine, for argument's sake, a tier 1 service would be all outpatient appointments. GPs, optometrists, dentists, counselors, dermatologists, psychologists, chiropody, pediatrics, screening and prevention, disease prevention, mental health, plastic surgery, personal care. Imagine all these were tier 1 and every person in the country got £1,000 a year in this policy. And if you use it, it's gone. If you don't use it, it carries over to the next year. So let's say you stay super well for 10 years. You've got £10,000 there for when something happens. Or let's say you've saved that money and you want to go and get a cosmetic job done, which you can't really do in the NHS. You can do that. You should be able to do that. You should be able to prioritize your health and then get the things that are really bothering you fixed. Glasses, for instance. I would need glasses every year, but I don't need glasses every year. I change my prescription every 2 years. So that costs about £200 every 2 years. I currently pay for that myself because the government doesn't offer that. I should be able to get glasses. Dentist, I go to the dentist twice a year. It's like £120 for appointments, some work done. Could be £300, but it could only be £120 if you look after your teeth. So let's say you go to the doctor twice a year, you go to the dentist twice a year, and you go to the optometrist that year. You're looking at £700. You've got £300 to carry over to the next year. And over a lifespan, there'll be a lot of savings. But let's say you're prioritizing your personal care. Let's say the government was giving you an incentive to go to the gym and keep your weight in men's and all these different things. There's loads of different things that they can offer when an insurance-based system, because they have the data. It's all data-driven. They can offer people incentives to be better. And you'll see the health of the population increase. Now again, people can't cheat a system when they can't do it unlimited, because it'll come out of their personal pockets. If you're going to the doctor, 20 times a year or 7 times a year or 8 times a year, is there really a need to go to the doctor 8 times a year? The government or the insurance company could easily put together an online service that costs a fraction of the amount for people with the silly ailments. So a doctor doesn't need to waste their time. And this is where I think the system goes, because as long as the NHS is government run, these ideas and these concepts will never ever get implemented. And I believe we would save the country a lot of money. The healthcare professionals will only get money on their clients have been seen. They won't be able to exaggerate costs. The government would have their auditors in there straight away. They can't charge £200 for a pair of gloves, because we all know it's 10 quid for a pack of 100. They can't change that. The government will just simply say, well, we're not paying that. And then the doctors will say, well, we're not doing it. And then somebody else will come in and do it for a reasonable price, because that's what capitalism does. There is an opportunity here for doctors to make a lot of money, and there is an opportunity here for the country to make a lot of savings. And there is an opportunity here for people to improve their health using holistic methods. Because in my recent videos I've shown you that prescription pills aren't necessarily the solution. Lifestyle is the most important thing to your health and longevity. Social security. Social security is super important. The idea of people working all their lives and getting to their retirement age where they can't support themselves anymore. They can't work and make more money. If I need money right now, I can work overtime. I can work at a second job. I can do various things to make extra money. But when you get to a certain age, you can't do that anymore. And it is a right, and it is something that I believe in, that the country should look after those people. However, I do think certain things could be changed to reduce the requirement of government to do this. Now, imagine, for argument's sake, I think of my children. So I think of my children. I have 2 boys, and I think when I die one day, I want them to be financially secure. Let's say I'm not relying on government to look after them. I'm taking the responsibility as a parent to make sure that those 2 boys will have as good a life as I can possibly provide them. What if there was a legislation there that the government allowed my pension pot to go into their pension pots without being taxed? That could add 20 or 30 years of savings of compound interest into their pots. And then they did it to their children. In 4 or 5 generations, retirement would be a lot less focused on government money. And we could fix the government money to a set amount now. And inflation and time would slowly get rid of that over time. And people wouldn't feel it. There's loads we can be done to make things better. But we have to remember that it's not unlimited. It's not an unlimited checkbook. We can't take out debt to pay for this. We can't expect the future generations to pay for us now. And I believe if children were more reliant on parents and parents were more reliant on children for the future, that would improve relationships within the family. And we all know in recent years, relationships between the family has not been so good. Since the introduction of welfare, relationships between parents and children has declined, because it used to be parents had their children, parents retired, their children had their children, and the parents raised those children while the parents went to work. So there was a social bond there, 3 generations. And the children supported the parents when they got too old. But because we've segregated it all and we now look to the state to solve all those problems, and we should be looking to the circular family. That is a fundamental issue that I have with society right now. Is we forget that family is the most important thing, not government, family. And again, so welfare is important. So there's a few things that I have issues with welfare in the UK. For a start, I have no problem with people who are disabled or people who can't work because they have issues with X, Y, and Z. I totally understand that. Not everybody's life is as easy as ours. Not everybody has the same abilities as us. But there are professional people that milk the system, and I don't appreciate that. Those professional people that milk the system should be found out and should be got rid of or pushed into the market. Now, there's also a fundamental flaw with welfare. And anybody who's worked really hard in their life will agree with me here where, let's say, for argument's sake, I lose my job. I lose my job, I have a mortgage, I have a car payment, I've been paying tax for the last 20 years, I've never missed a day of work, but I've lost my job for whatever reason, something out of my control. I haven't left my job, I've been paid off. My company's closed down and there's been an issue and I have to go and find a job now. Again, I've never been unemployed for longer than a month. In fact, I don't think I've ever been unemployed because I've never left a job without a job. But my point is, let's say, because now I have a massive mortgage to pay. Not everybody always has savings. So let's say you have enough savings to last you 2 months and the markets are particularly bad. We're in the middle of a recession. There should be some sort of insurance or some sort of security for a person who's worked to get a percentage of his wage, because he's paying a percentage of his wage into his tax. You know, you should get a percentage of your wage for a certain amount of time. Let's say you were getting a percentage for 3 months. Let's say you got 75% of your wage for 3 months. That means your mortgage is safe. You're not getting into massive amounts of debt. And you've got enough time to find a new job. After that, it stops and you go down onto your job seeker's allowance of £75 a week or whatever, which is not sustainable and not a... But you don't have that 3 months of bad debt that you have to dig yourself out of. And this is the thing where welfare, it's geared towards low level, but it should also be geared towards the working class as well. So that's my first thing. I believe welfare should be slightly more in some areas and slightly less in other areas. But ultimately, I believe in the concept of welfare to ensure that vulnerable people continue to have dignity. And nobody should put under unnecessary pressure, especially if they've been contributing to society. Again, if children were going to school at a younger age, that would create more opportunities for people to go to work at a younger age. We'd have less people stuck at home looking after their children. You know, a lot less housewives, a lot more people entering the industry. And this is what the country needs. This is what the country needs to keep the country going and keep the country building and going in the right direction. Immigration now. So this is always a ropey topic, because if you're on one side of the fence, you're anti-immigration. If you're on the other side of the fence, you want to invite everybody in. Now, I do believe immigration should be controlled. We don't just want any old Tom, Dick and Harry coming into the country. However, with a decreasing population, the country needs to attract quality people to replace that population. So if we've got a decreasing population in the next 10 years of 1 million people, essentially we want to attract 1 million people into the country. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean 1 million individuals. That could be a family from Australia, for example. You know, well-educated husband and wife, doctors, whatever. They could come into the country with their 3 kids. That's 5 people come into the country. Yes, we have to spend some money raising those children, but we've got 2 people straight ready to go into the market. And we have loads of well-educated partners. India, you know, Pakistan, Australia, South Africa. There's loads of countries. I'm just throwing out a few names of countries that I've, have affinity with, the people that I've worked in before. We could even be taking people from Europe if they choose to favor Great Britain over Europe, America if they choose to favor, but we have to create a country people want to come to. And we're never going to have people coming for the weather. People don't want to come to the UK for the weather. The weather's shit. People want to come for security, dependability, reliability, strength. That's what has sold this isle for generations. And that's what we need to get to. We need to get to that position of strength. But we need to control our immigration, but we need immigration. Immigration is important. It takes 20 years to create a customer. It takes 40 years to create an investor. We need to import these people in now. And if we can import them in educated, that saves us 100 grand. So those people need to want to come to this country. That's the first thing. And yes, we're already a multicultural, diverse nation. If you look at the statistics of, the nation, we are diverse as they come. We've always been diverse. Great Britain has always been, you have the Vikings, you have the Romans. We've had loads of people come and colonize and change, and that's just who we are. That's fundamentally what makes us British. We have to accept that and we have to move forward. We can't sit and live in the past and try and be, we don't want these people in and we don't want these people in. What we want is qualified, educated people. That's what we want. Sometimes we have to accept a couple that aren't, but you have to remember we need a labour force as well. If our huge labour force is retiring, we need labour as well. Labour has to be imported as well. We're raising a next generation of, intelligent engineers, and we raise very few labour people. Not Labour the party, but few labourers, very few labourers. We'll always create a few labourers because not everybody is as intellectually gifted as everybody else. That's life. That's what makes humanity beautiful. So we need to import these educated people in to take these slots and these jobs. And that's why immigration is so important. This one is a big one for me, debt. So at the moment, the country is in £2 trillion worth of debt, right? We pay 45 billion a year in debt. That debt needs to be shrunk down and got rid of, and we can't go into debt again. The government should be restricted on spending only money it receives from the economy. We can't make money from nothing. Those days are over. We've been caught out. Every country in the world has been caught out. We're not the worst, but we're definitely not the best. And there's better ways to raise capital to do projects. If there's money to be made, the capital system will do it for us. We just got to point people in the right direction and show them the market. For instance, I was reading this the other day. It's like, I'm really interested in agriculture. Agriculture is one of the big industries I'm interested in. And at the moment, the UK imports something like 3.1 billion pounds a year worth of vegetables. These vegetables could be grown in this country, provided we have cheap energy and the infrastructure to grow these vegetables. We have the means. We have a temperate climate, yes, but we have means of improving our climate. Greenhouses, polytunnels, lighting, controlled water, fertilizer. These are the things that can make our country great. There's 3.1 billion worth of money that doesn't have to leave the country, that can stay inside the country. And who knows, we could produce 5 billion and we could sell 2 billion back to the continent. Remember, the continent's going to see their own problems coming up. They've got massive shortfalls in population. They got to find people too. Germany has massive energy issues. They got to find energy from somewhere. Russia's disappearing. Well, Russia's gone. What is Germany going to do? That's a huge manufacturing infrastructure there. They can't power. That's opportunity for us. But we need to have foresight, we need to have vision, and we need to be looking at this data. And we can't be going into debt to achieve it, and government can't be interfering. Government needs to facilitate. That's it. Stay out of it. Legislate, protect people, protect property. That's it. Let business do what they do. Let people do what they do. Because nobody's going to work for less money, especially if the economy's strong. You're going to be fighting for the best quality talent. Wages will go up automatically. So this is a massive one. We know this is an issue right now. Where do I start? I love my planet. I believe in trying our best to make the planet as good and as habitable as possible for as long as possible. We're not going anywhere. This planet's not going anywhere. We need to be better. Point one. Secondly, this green revolution is impossible, especially now with the collapse of Russia. Most of our resources we need for the electric vehicles and solar panels and all that come from there. We are not going to be able to maintain this green revolution. We need to have a domestic source of oil and gas. We need more exploration in the North Sea. And we need to do it as cleanly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And that gas and that oil needs to be tied into contracts to the UK to control price. Fixed prices. The government gives you access to drill in that particular area. We get the price at premium rate. The surplus you can sell. We're not bothered. As long as we've got what we need at a premium rate, that's all we need. We need nuclear. I know it's taboo, but we need it. We need as much nuclear as we can get. The new modern day nuclear power plants can use up all the old stuff. That's only taken, 60 years to get to that point? So who knows where we'll be in another 60 years. But right now is the problem. Right now is the problem. Not 60 years, right now. And it takes about 15 years to get a nuclear power plant online. So we need to start planning that shit now. And where viable, we do green. If we've got a good windy area and it's making good, and it's making good energy, invest in it. If it's financially viable, do it. But if it's not financially viable, don't do it because it sounds green, net zero. We're shooting ourselves in the foot for no reason. What we need to be focusing on is getting the country the enough energy it needs to make sure it can grow its food and support its population and do everything it needs to do. Then, once we have enough energy, then we look at how can we make it better? How can we make things better? Everybody should drive an electric car. That's great. But realistically, how many electric cars are we going to be able to get on the road in the next 10 to 15 years? It'll happen naturally. If the electric car is a better product than the petrol car or the diesel car, it'll happen naturally. We don't have to legislate it. People change their minds. People see things. If electric cars foster and it's beating all the petrol cars, the petrol heads are going to move to electric. If the electric cars have, less maintenance costs and they're lasting longer and everybody's happy, people are going to move to electric cars. Consumer will decide what's best for the consumer. So you've got to make your green products the best for the consumer. And that'll happen naturally. We don't need to legislate it and shoot ourselves in the foot to solve these problems. It's not just me talking about this either, by the way. There's loads of guys around the world. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're realists. I just think a lot of people are hiding behind stuff that they don't need to hide behind. That pretty much brings this episode to a conclusion. I know it's a bit longer than normal and there's a lot of stuff that's, been pretty hard to digest. But let me try and sum this up. The UK two-party system needs to be revamped. It is not working. There is too much history between these two parties and they're not inclusive enough for the mainstream centre. We need a party focusing on what's right for the country, not just right for the people. The country should be the most important thing. The people are second. The people make the country. And if the people's views and goals and ambitions and everything align with where the country needs to go, the country will be great. If the people don't care about the country will never be great and will end up some socialist country like Russia or China. We also need to change the way we see government as the people who are in charge of our lives. They're not. We're in charge of our lives. We make the decisions. We have the ability to read and interpret this data. Stop watching the BBC and Sky and the political commentary and start reading and start looking at the problems around you because you can see them. You've experienced them. How many people have tried to go to the doctors? Or how many times have you tried to get into the dentist? The problems are all around us. You see them. Start researching them. Why is that a problem? Don't just blame the government. It's not the government always. Sometimes it's people. Sometimes it's state of mind. Sometimes it's the way people think. And until you start digesting and thinking about the actual issues and you stop looking at government to solve them, the answers come evident very quick. And again, we need to have more children. We need to encourage our children. Like, I've had my children. I'm too old to have children. I've passed that. But we need to encourage our children to have children. And we need to make it possible for them to have as many children as possible. Because they are our future. They are the future of this country. And we need our children and our children's children and our children's children's children to make this country great again. And until then, we need to accept that we need to bring people's children in and people's children's children in. Continuously grow our population or at least maintain our population size. I think ideally right now, the way I see it is if we get our population to around 70 million, mostly consumers, import another 2 million consumers ages 20 to 45, skilled, trained, educated. That could do a lot for the country. But people aren't going to want to come to a country that's broken, polarized, and negative. We have loads going for us in the country. We're not as racist as everybody makes us out to be. We're a really inclusive country. We have good systems, we have good hearts, we have good people. We just need to get that all in the right place and focus all the negativity out the picture and focus on the positive stuff. But we need a vision. We don't have a political leader giving us a vision. You look at the great guys, that we all, run, Steve Jobs and, Elon Musk. They all have a vision. They all have something that they work towards. And they get all of us rally behind them. And we want them to succeed. Where is our political party that's giving us that vision that we want to rally behind and succeed? Rather than talking about all the negative stuff. Talk about the plan for the future. Acknowledge the negative stuff. We need to know about the negative stuff. Stop pushing it under the rug. But as a nation, we need to pull together. We need a vision. And we need to work towards that vision. And we need to stop being so selfish. Hardship is hardship. But out of all good hardships come really easy times. And we've had it easy for far too long. So that brings this episode to an end. Thank you for taking this time to watch my video. And I always appreciate any feedback. So till next time.